Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Southside Stories, the podcast where we talk to leaders, founders, and entrepreneurs here in London. And just a quick shout out and a reminder that if you have not yet subscribed, please consider doing that and hitting the notification bell. We've got loads of new episodes coming up with some really interesting people, including today, Neil Davidson from HeyHuman. Hey, Neil.
Hello.
Hello. Great. So Neil, agents, we're going to talk about the world of agencies and marketing and AI and some other great topics. But kick us off. Tell us a little bit about you and your background and where you're based.
Yeah, so background, I've always been a kind of marketing and comms person. I started way back when in working within a Tory government, so I ended up doing government comms. Then I made the leap to big agencies, so sort of global agencies, and then got into leading agencies, and then by a very weird route. Everybody says their route is weird, I know, but I think it's up there. I ended up buying and part of an existing agency group, and then that's been HeyHuman for the last sort of 12, 13 years of my life.
Yeah, quite a stretch now.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations on making it that long, because it's kind of a tough world out there. So that's a great.
I think it is. Yeah.
Great stretch of time already. We'll talk more about that in a second. So, tell us a bit more then about the leap from being a comms person, and I started in communications as well. But tell me about, what drew you to that in the first place?
That is a very good question that I struggle to answer, only because my son's looking at universities at the minute, or he's part in that process. I'm like, why did I decide to choose communications? Because back then it was a bit niche. You know what I mean? There weren't many places doing it, and I don't know. I was just always interested in. I was a massive reader. Weirdly enough, I never really went to a lot of films, so I ended up doing half my degree was film studies, and it just interested me. And there's happy days when you just did a degree because you were really interested, because you got money for your fees were paid.
Yeah, the good old days.
Yeah, the good old days. And yes, you came out with a little bit of debt, but not much. And then, so you could just be more like what drives you, what is genuinely you're into. And then weirdly, I found a weird grant in some fund in Aberdeen. Some guy died like a couple of 100 years ago and left a grant for people who were from Aberdeen and studied in England, and that was your own criteria. So that funded me a little bit more, and I was off.
Brilliant. And so, first roles, were they on the client side, or did you go into agency life?
Yeah, no, I first roles on the client side. What was then called the Government Information Service. So it was run by a guy who died not that long ago, I don't think, called Bernard Ingham. So he was the guy.
Oh yeah. Bernard Ingham, as in the Thatcher's private secretary. Yeah.
Yeah. So he was the
big figure.
Yeah. So that guy, the stairs pushing people out the way after her first vote when she lost her leadership. So he was the head of the Government Information Service, and the idea was you had professionals that went from department to department. My best role was working in the Department of Health. No experience, and then I had a great boss who would just say, here's £10 million, go and work with an agency and see what you can do about bringing down drug misuse, or back then it was HIV prevention, stuff like that, but from zero to like sink or swim, which was brilliant, and dealing with ministers, which was scary.
Yeah, they're great. Well, maybe I'm sure it was. I'm just thinking back to my career, because I started in communications as well.
Yeah.
And I worked for BT for quite a long time. And that was sort of mid to late 90s. So, I guess it'd been privatised for a while, but it was still had that slight feel of ex-government sort of
Yeah.
entity. But the brilliant thing about those companies and organisations back in those days were the budgets were
crazy.
amazing.
Yeah. I mean,
And you had a lot of professional people in them as well that were exceptionally good.
Yeah, and you didn't
at their jobs.
appreciate it until later.
Yeah, you didn't. I mean, a BT had its own media department, a media buying department. It had like its own picture library. It had all of these experts in the different fields. It was a great training ground.
Yeah, it was a bit like a lot of professional people crossed with the thick of it. That was essentially it. So you learned a lot, but also it was brutal, but in a good way. So if you came out the other side, agency seemed like easy, to be really honest, compared to some of the stuff, in terms of press office and things like that.
Tell us then a little bit about the transition. Well, I'm kind of curious. Well, let me go there actually. So the ministers, because I'm curious, you mentioned that. I mean, what was that like? Was it they were very demanding, or was it because they needed educating on what made a good message?
Yeah,
or
they were either incompetent. That whole thing, Rory, and that podcast, The Rest is Politics, talks about like ministers just dropped in from nowhere, expected to there was a lot of that, and it's so long ago. I could say somebody like Virginia Bottomley was awful.
Okay.
A lot of people would be going who, but she was awful. She was head, and then you had people like Brian Mulroney. He was like incredibly. I think he's passed as fairly recently. So, but he was like really scary, and he was from some incredibly staunch religious cult. And I think he became chairman of Celtic Football Club or something like that, but you just didn't mess with him. And so I remember things like, going in with a big TV campaign where the whole point was rock stars who'd been through the mill with drugs, etc., kind of pushing the don't do it message because they had credibility. So we went in with 12 stars that had, done that road, and then we came out with his stars, which were like Cliff Richard, Elton John, and Michael Caine. I remember were some of them, So it was that kind of stuff. You just learn how to sell things in.
Yeah. And then at some point you made the transition to the agency world. What's the story there?
Yeah, I just wanted to on naivety. I do think, and yet again, a bit like you reflect now. I was just I didn't know enough to know that actually back then the leap between clients and agencies, when you went in one door, you were in that door. It's not like that now. So I just knocked on a lot of doors until I realised actually one agency was just desperate, and nobody who was actually a decent account man would have taken the job, but they were like, what's the worst that can happen? And if I'm really honest, I look back as well, there's a bit of Scottish mafia going on. So funnily enough, the first job that I got was a Glaswegian boss who was very good actually, and they realised in retrospect how good they were.
Great. And then from there, what happened next? And tell us a little bit about sort of the transition then to running or owning and running your own agency.
Yeah, so I did a lot of great gigs with big brands, travel around the world, all the kind of cliche. And then I was kind of like, there's a danger. You reach a level and you're always going to be doing the same thing. You're just going to get paid more. At the end of the day, it's going to be strategy, client relationships till you leave the industry. So I wanted to do something slightly different. So I kind of moved to an agency that was less creatively driven, RAP, which was a big global network, but was more about leaders as commercial leaders to try and land that. Then I had quite a lot of offers to do startups and all that, and I was quite happy not to, because I just didn't want it to take over my life. And then I ended up working for a group called Billington Cartmel Group, who had just been bought, who were incredibly successful, had been bought by private equity. Private equity, for various reasons, should never buy advertising agencies, in my humble opinion. That didn't massively work out, and somehow I ended up being part of 3 of us buying the agency, part of the agency group, rebranding it and starting again. And like I said to you in the prep, the only thing we had is cash flow. We didn't like the name. The people worked for a different type of agency. We didn't want to be in those specialisms. We didn't like the clients. One or two we loved, but and we didn't like the building we're in. I don't know what else is left. So I'll be honest, it took 5 years. Never underestimate, you'll know better than most, how long it takes to change a business, big or small. But it took 5 years to kind of turn that ship around from the day we called it HeyHuman to like just running it as a business without all the legacy stuff.
And what year was that when you did
it would have been 12 years ago.
12 years, yeah. I mean, just that agencies, I was fascinated by the agencies because they're such a dynamic, they all seem to be buying each other or becoming part of bigger groups and spin-offs. So what is it about the agency world that lends itself to that, do you think?
I think two things, and it is a gut reaction. I'd say a weird mix of ego and economics. I mean, the ego bit, I don't need to explain. It's right, and I say that in a good way. I've been doing a lot of interviews with people about AI recently, and I do come out of it going, God, there's some incredibly talented people in our industry, but there's a lot of egos as well. So I don't know if you remember when I think Saatchi thought we're trying to buy Midland Bank. That was probably the peak of ego. Would have been back in the 80s probably, I guess. But there's a lot of ego that means, there's that classic journey, launch an agency with your name and hope to get bought out. And I think it's just economics at the minute. I think there's going to be more, it's going to be scale, isn't it? I mean, I hate people who predict things, but I'll do it. But, you're either going to be very big or very small because the margins are only getting smaller. So you need scale. And also there's so much change, like AI, you need the money behind you to invest for 5 years time. So those are the things for me.
Yeah, interesting. Right, we're going to talk about AI in a minute. But tell me first about HeyHuman. I mean, what is fast forward to 2025 or the last couple of years? What is your niche, if there is one? What's your kind of angle at the agency?
Yeah, I think everybody's got to be honest and say most agencies have less of a niche than they think they have. But our starting principle was about, there was a lot of learnings about behavioural science in the wider world. There'd been a lot of learnings about marketing and marcoms generally, but it didn't feel like our industry had kind of caught up. And around that time, Rory Sutherland was president of the IPA, and he was more of an industry figure, whereas now he's kind of blown up a bit in Twitter and all that kind of stuff. But he was president of IPA and had done a big thing about behaviour economics and bringing it into the industry. So, but it didn't really stick. But we took some of the techniques from that and tested them, particularly a kind of what we call a 3 questions workshop, to make people think about the behaviour they're trying to change rather than, we're just trying to create awareness and all that, which just can be quite lazy sometimes because, why are you trying to create awareness? What model do you work to? Just doesn't get, how do you think marketing works for your brand? Doesn't get think about. And then because of that, we tapped into neuroscience. So we did a lot of testing in terms of what makes comms work or not work. So, fast forward to now, we still have that sort of 3 questions at the heart of what we do, which is really simple. It's like, for any brief, what's the behaviour we're trying to change? What are the barriers for people to carry out that behaviour? And then what are the comparisons that people already have in their mind that you could use as a shortcut to get them together? That's always been a hard one to explain unless you're doing it. But it just makes people think a bit more objectively about what they're trying to do. There's lots of other spin-off benefits, but that's stayed core to what we do. And then neuroscience, we spent a lot of time doing a lot of research, and we really got into EEG testing, so putting caps on people's heads and things like that, to get to what we call unusual everyday, which is quite simply, and it's articulating what is probably flying about in our industry, but is never quite captured, which is the unusual element of comms is what captures your attention. But unless it's got enough generic, whether it's category codes or codes that matter to your life, it never goes into long-term memory. Now, my neuroscience guru that worked with me on that for years, Aoife, is probably wincing at my explanation of it. But that's essentially it. And my example of that is Sony balls. Everybody remembers that Sony balls one where all the RGB coloured balls are bouncing down a street in San Francisco. It's like the industry's most loved ad. All right, certainly up there. And yet when we tested it using NS rather than what people said, they all remembered the ad, but they all, or a large proportion of them, attributed it to Samsung.
Right.
Because they hadn't got the unusual and the everyday right. They definitely got the unusual, but the everyday, the way they've done it, is like, well, those are category cues that are very generic. Who's the leader in that category? Samsung. So I won't think as Sony. So it's stuff like that. And I remember working with Sony at the time and they're getting very annoyed when I said that, but it's not, I've never diss somebody else's work just for the sake of it. It's to make the point, like, you need to think more like that. And it's not hard, it's the kind of thinking fast, thinking slow stuff as well. It's just like, help people get your comms, because nobody cares.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say about creativity. It's brand attribution, because actually I can remember sometimes I walk out of a cinema. I have to say the number of ads I've seen these days that are really make an impression on me is a lot less than the 90s or noughties.
Yeah.
But and even then, when there is one, and I walk away from the cinema, I can remember the ad. I can't always remember the brand. So the brand attribution is there's a lot of wasted money there, isn't there? In terms of great,
Over the years, I've worked with Guinness, and I think they do brilliantly. But I think that's the other point to everybody is like, don't act like you're Guinness, because Guinness has just got a gift of the pint. I mean, that is just they own black and white. I mean, on you go. Not many brands have that, so you've got to think like that. How do you? And then you get into. So how do you do that in a way that's engaging, not sonic devices that make you want to shoot yourself? Or how do you do it creatively?
Tell us about one or two examples might be really helpful here, because I think people probably understand some of the concepts behind this, but in a real sense, maybe some of the campaigns you've worked on, where is behavioural science or neuroscience? Where's it sort of made a difference to maybe how you've developed a campaign, or where you've been able to see it change and nudge behaviour?
Yeah. Okay. So annoyingly, always the ones that are the strongest ones sometimes come back from way back when. But I'll pick these because I think it really helps, to your point, make it concrete to people. So we had a brief way back when. But it was essentially about making a shower gel more everyday, or get people to use. So it was a premium shower gel. How do you get people to use it every day? So the Marcom's answer might be, do blah blah blah, show everyday usage. Put a TV campaign out there to encourage people to just treat themselves a bit. I can see an everyday treat ad. Whereas actually the answer is put a hook on the actual product, because what are you gonna do? Yeah. So we might be doing ourselves out of business, but do you know what I mean? Like the answer.
Do you mean actually put a thing on so it hangs up and it's there in front of you on the shower and it's on, and then you're going to use it, right? Yeah.
And sometimes I think I annoy people by going, is X or Y that we're proposing really a job for advertising? It might be a job, and I think that's the difference between, we touched on it, marketing and Marcoms. I think sometimes Marcoms tries to fit things that are marketing problems, or it's a very expensive way to fix that problem.
Do you have a CFO in the agency?
Yeah.
Does he, when you're proposing something that perhaps isn't a kind of campaign, does he get a bit angsty?
He never sees
No.
work. He's not in a workshop, you know. But then a more creative example was we worked in a cider a few years ago, and its downside, well, its niche was it was cloudy and looked a bit like I wouldn't drink it. I'm just not that kind of cider drinker. Do you know what I mean? It just was a bit like, whoa, is that
Scrumpy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. You're talking to somebody from Aberdeen, so to me it's like just alien. But, you know, it was for a niche that was really appealing, as you've said, Matt. But for mainstream, it was really unappealing. So when we did the sort of 3 questions workshop, somebody came up with a comparison, which is like, why do people go to Waitrose and pay for eggs that are covered in crap, literally? Do you know what I mean? Pay a premium because they know they've not been in a cage, they've been picked up from the floor and all that. Why do we pay a premium for free-range eggs? And yet that cider's cloudiness is seen as a negative. So the campaign line was free-range cider. So we just kind of switched the reference, and then all the visuals around it help people get the cue of free-range eggs. So of course that cider was if you're going to expand the base of people buying it, was people who would go into Waitrose kind of thing. So that, for me, that's a really good example of a shortcut. But also, you know, sometimes it just nudges things. Not everything has to be like a really big behavioural solution, but it does make you think, actually, are we trying too hard to fix something by, you know, facing it head on rather than is there a smarter way around it? You know?
Yeah, that's a great example. I love that that creativity there and that connection. You mentioned Guinness. Anything that you would like to talk around Guinness in terms of some of the work you've done there, or I think Biocult. We spoke earlier. I think Biocult was another one.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I just think Guinness. You know, we work on it particularly in Africa, and I just think it's fascinating because I think, you know, maybe Nigeria sells as much, if not more, than Ireland, and I think that's the really big upside of working in agencies is understanding, like, you've got a brand like Guinness, but understanding that it's a totally different brand and a totally different cultural connection when you go into Nigeria. Like, I've sat in a bar in Lagos and somebody said to me, without any nudging, I hear there's an Irish version. And making you realise that, you know, you've just got to really sometimes work quite hard to do something quite simple. So the position of Guinness out there is just very, very different. It's still very male. It's more, legacy still, but, you know, it's less, you know, Guinness from the 80s onwards has been quite intellectual here, whereas out there it's, you know, ironically even more of a premium product. But there is a underlying thing about masculinity that is kind of it's quite a difficult thing to manage well, but we did some great experiential work a little while back, but that was based on our neuroscience kind of understanding that, you know, smell is and taste are the most underused levers, triggers in marketing. So we did a experiential event in Lagos where each room represented the different attributes of Guinness, you know, which was just a very different way, because there's a mythology or not, I don't think it's far off the truth that, you know, it's like 12 plus times you have to drink Guinness before you like it. You know, but the power of Guinness is, like, everybody wants to like it. Do you know what I mean? Like, when you were younger, you would have drank whiskey and went, that's disgusting, and possibly parked it for 20 years. But when I was, I don't know, 19 or whatever, I'd be like, you know, if I'm honest with myself, I want to drink Guinness and like it because it's what the cool people drink, kind of thing.
I find Guinness amazing because it's sort of. I mean, when I was at college, it was a big drink, and then the surfer ad. When was that? That was late 90s, mid 90s, and then anyway, it sort of became even more popular, and it had, you know, the really cool the soundtrack to that surfer ad, And then more recently at Christmas, it was when it hit the headlines because there was a supply shortage.
Yeah.
Because people had started on, I think on TikTok, the Guinness Challenge,
Yeah,
I think you had to
G.
drink it down to halfway
Yeah.
to the G or something. It's an amazing brand how it sort of keeps, it never goes out completely out of fashion, but then sometimes it seems to spike in terms of its popularity.
Yeah, I think they're really fascinating. And I remember talking to a client about this, not a Guinness client, but a client working outside of that category. But going into pub, God, it might have been 10 years ago, and it's always good to just remind yourself about the real world. This happens to be a pub, it's not the worst gig, is it? But just looking at the fonts on the bar, I'm going, the only one that we know from about 7 years ago that still exists, that was there 7 years ago, is Guinness. Like all the other, ones just totally gone. But it was in real trouble for a long time, like being delisted in lots of channels. And I think, going back to that, is it advertising or is it something else? They still always had the advertising. But the biggest thing they did back then was sort out the quality of the pint,
Right.
In the trade, because they're like,
Yeah.
well, we might wax and wane in terms of popularity, and that split the G kind of thing is sometimes a gift that you can't create. But actually, we've got to get back to basics, and if it's not a good drinking experience, and that's what they spent a lot of time. But they were really like on the edge at one point as a brand, and you think of like, I don't know, John Smiths and stuff like that, and all those, they're just total, like Kraft just cleared them out. Guinness clung on, and now is like crazy,
Yeah. Very interesting. Let's switch tack a little bit, Neil. Let's talk about running an agency. What that's like in 2025.
Brutal.
Quite a few agencies. There's quite a few agencies in Southwark. I know what it is about Southwark and the South Bank. There's a lot of creative, isn't there? There's loads of creative agencies around doing great work, but there's a lot of them. So, I mean, there seems to be a lot of competition. I mean, we've had a few on the podcast already. I mean, there seems to be some recurring themes. I don't know if any of these chime with you, but finding staff, retaining staff, that seems to be a big one. What are some of the other challenges of running an agency currently?
Yeah, I think people's definitely one. I think there's the speed of change, and I know you said we're going to get onto it, but AI. But also, I would say it's a personal thing. I still think there's a bit of a COVID hangover. And what people, because at the end of the day, unless you've got happy people, it's a cliche, but it is true. It's a cliche for a reason. Unless you've got happy people, you're in trouble. But I think people's expectations of going into the office have shifted, and everybody knows that, but it's really complex because, I feel like we do 2 days a week. I personally think 3 might be better, but not because I'm kind of a control freak, but I think 3 very quickly becomes 2 and 2 very quickly becomes 1, and I don't think 1's sustainable. I think if you get to 1, you might as well just have a virtual model and embrace it, and make that work better. And also people generally want a limited burst of time, but it needs to be like a high quality experience. So we're like in the ministry, which is a separate property. We were like the first tenants in there, started by the Ministry of Sound, and I think we got really lucky because we moved there 6-7 years ago, obviously before the pandemic, and it's become the sweet spot. People want to come in 2 or 3 days a week. We've got, the ministry have got a proper gym, not like one of these scuzzy kind of little hotel gyms, like a proper gym. Lots of gym classes, DJs probably 2 nights a week, South London's longest bar, restaurant kind of food if you want it, blah, blah, blah. But, and people think that now is kind of like the standard. It's not premium, it's kind of what people expect. And for us, I think our retention rates are really good. And we've got a lot of people who've been there since we launched. And I think that is the the thing. And also it's just so different now, generationally. You know, a lot of people who are at the start of their career want to come in more. And they need to come in more to learn. You know, how we started talking about great bosses at the start, whereas it's really hard. You know, if you've seen somebody 2 days a week, you're probably seeing somebody 1 day a week because they're in meetings or whatever. And that's tough, and it's not as much fun. I mean, it just isn't as much fun because, you know, there's less people in the industry, margins are tighter, yada yada yada. But clients aren't doing shoots abroad and all that because technology means, you know, my first jobs were, you know, I could literally say I'd go to France every summer to shoot a Cronenberg ad. Somehow we made a Royal Navy ad, which we involved going to Miami and Antigua. Do you know, and that was just like, that was part of the gig. So I think, you know, to circle back to your question, I think it's like there's a big industry challenge about getting people excited about working in our industry, and then it's like pitching your agency.
Yeah, that's all. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in there. That's all really interesting. Actually, I was talking to an architect because for a while I was did marketing at Microsoft,
right?
And at that point, Microsoft were based out in Thames Valley Park, and that was, when was that? Sort of late 90s, and the technology park was a thing then. Yeah. And I was talking to this guy called Philip from Orbit Architects in probably quite near you actually, and he was saying, that, you know, they've virtually closed that building, or they've repurposed the building. Microsoft isn't really in there anymore. In fact, most of the technology companies have moved sort of into London, and I think that's partly perhaps what you've described there, that if you are wanting to attract people that perhaps, you know, might be working from home, there's sort of got to be a bit of a reason to schlep into London and brave the transport networks. And what you just described sounds really cool. Yeah. I'll have to come down and see you in the ministry, because that sounds really, really cool. If I was a young person, that sounds the kind of place that, I would like to go and work there for 3 days a week at least. Yeah.
Yeah, and so, you know, and I just think it's a shame. You know, I do think it's a shame because, of course, if I was in my 20s or 30s, I wouldn't know what I'm missing. Or what, you know, because I don't know what it used to be like. And I can think of a couple of people who've brought their sons in to their agencies, big agencies, and the sons like, why would I want to work here? It's just a load of old people looking at their Macs all day. It's like harsh, but, you know.
Yeah. Whereas, I mean, we sound like old men now, but you know, when it was so fun being in, you know, I was on client side, you both, but, you know, the Fridays, the excitement of shoots and advertising campaigns, and just Friday afternoons, just, you know, going out for long lunches and so, I don't know, it was a fun times. Yeah.
It's a people thing as well. I mean, that's
definitely.
At the end of the day. Do you know what I mean? It was just people who cared about people and actually, you know, were talented, funny. I remember having a creative director, Andrew Cracknell, and he had a car that looked like he'd stolen it off the set of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. And he would literally pull up on a Friday, like late morning, see how many people he could get into this open top Chitty Chitty Bang Bang sort of thing, and drive off to Brighton.
Fantastic.
You know,
attract
nothing
characters.
Done, but exactly that as well. Yeah.
Where would you like to take the agency? What's your ambition?
I think the big ambition for me, I guess two things that hopefully work together, is make AI work for us in our model. And then the second bit is to pass it on in good shape. So those two things are, you know, they're not just plucked out of the air. They are the things that I'm kind of working on, not as we speak, but, you know, to use the colloquialism, as we speak.
Yes, that's good to hear. I mean, one of the things that we coach a lot of businesses around is actually with business owners and founders is what is the end date? What is the date that your business is going to be finished? And it doesn't mean that you're going to stop working, because you probably could well love it still, but at least have the option where it's now a saleable asset, and you've got the option to sell it or do an employee buyout, whatever, and step away. So it's great to hear you've already got that mindset going. Are there any challenges that you'll foresee as you start to plot your path towards that?
Yeah, I guess the thing for me is, and I think it's a bit like when you pass your driving test, and you're of a certain age, so you think you can conquer the world. So you pass your driving test, think you're the bee's knees, etc. But then you have that moment. I had a hilarious passing my driving test experience because it happened in Liverpool, but I'll spare you that one. But you jump in the car for the first time, nobody else with you, and you just get the fear, because you kind of go, oh dear, I thought I was great, but this is scary, There's no dual controls, there's no mum and dad or whatever, mate or whatever. How do you get people to that point in a kind of manageable way? Because, and also balancing it with, and I was the same, nobody wants to listen to their parents. Do you know what I mean? So, how do you pass on that knowledge without it seeming like hectoring, nagging, whatever? Because there's just a lot tied up in that whole thing, and like there's the emotion of letting go of something that was your baby, that you've and I don't think people are honest enough about that. And last 12 years we've had some brilliant times, we've had some horrific times, we've had had everything that everybody who runs a business would recognise. So there's that, and then there's the negotiating that transition, emotionally, intellectually, financially. It's complex. And I just remember possibly the hardest years were for us when we were trying to pull away from the deal that we did with a private equity company who still had, a foot in the camp, because we started our loan with them and then eventually transferred it to the bank, and it was a crazy amount of money, let's put it like that. Think what you think it might be, and then multiply it by 10. And they were still they had skin in the game, so they didn't want to let go. We were taking the pain every day with a big debt over us, so we didn't, anything they said we just didn't really want to hear. So it's just managing all that, and like I say, I don't think people are honest enough about it. That's quite a lot to take on.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Let's move into AI then, because you trailed that a little bit. Especially in the creative industries, it's already. Tell us, what's it like? What's it feel like? Where do you think it's headed? What's going to be the impact on producing great creativity? And I know you've got a bigger view than that, but maybe let's start with just a little closer to home in terms of AI and creativity in running an agency. What does that sort of look like in the next couple of years, do you think?
Yeah, so I've got I'm backing two horses. One, run a business that needs to, I believe, adopt AI. And then two, I'm doing a doctorate in AI and creativity. So meantime, at the minute, I'm interviewing lots of creatives about how they feel about adopting AI, good or bad. For an agency, I think I've done enough change management, I hate the terminology, but what I'm talking about, work to know that it never goes as quickly as you want it to. It's really frustrating, and I think particularly for AI, top down doesn't work. So for us, what that means in a concrete way is me trying to kind of keep the plate spinning, but no more, and trying to hand it over to people in all the different departments of the agency, but particularly working out with creatives how they adopt it without because there's so much wrapped up in being a creative, and whether you're an artist or a commercial creative or something else, that I think people emphasise too much the technology bit, but not enough about identity, personal beliefs, and agency are the things that I'm really interested in, which is quite hard to get people to be honest about, but I find it really interesting because, when I talk to people, when I have an hour talking to them about all of this, quite often they say, well, I hadn't really thought about it that deeply, and that's just the reality of human beings. But when you push, there's stuff that everybody's really happy that AI can take away a lot of the stuff. There's creative work where they're happy to use AI, whether it's scamping or just helping sell in an idea or something like that. And then the stuff that just for various reasons seems to be not okay. And the one that comes up at the minute quite a lot actually, is music. So it's kind of weird how people are creative, they're like, that's fine, and then music is the kind of area that people are really not happy. And I think it's just because that is such a human to human thing, so it's trying to negotiate that both and other things within an agency, try to do it with a bit of sensitivity whilst also trying to make it happen.
Yeah, it's interesting about music, isn't it? Because actually I often think sort of mankind's best invention, if you can call it that, is music. And it is a very human expression, isn't it? So that's maybe why we're slightly aghast that code and machines can sort of get quite near to it. Do creators feel yet under pressure job-wise, or are they more thinking positively about how can I really use this tool?
I don't, without generalising, he said, and then generalising, I think it is that classic thing, that that cliche quote, AI won't take your job, but someone who uses AI will take your job.
Yeah.
I think everybody, I get a lot of intellectual, articulate responses, but that's the thing in the background. If you want to be a creative, unless you want to make some stance until the end, the bitter end in about 18 months' time, it's kind of, you're going to have to adopt it. It's how you negotiate it. So I think there's a bit of pragmatism. There's a bit of slower than it needs to be to adopt it. And I think it's different for different creatives. So if I talk to a creative in their 50s, their version is, I've got all these creative skills, I can use AI in a way that either takes away some of the stuff, like I said, or I can enhance what AI does by adding what I bring to it. Whereas if I talk to maybe creatives in their 20s, early 20s, who basically lived with AI since the start, there's a bit of, I don't need all that kind of 20 years of craft. That's what AI is for. Do you know what I mean? I'm not going to get worried about the philosophical stuff about it. I'm just doing it to hoover up all the opportunities I can, like, things like video production companies who are just not doing anything without AI anymore, versus ad agencies. It's like slowly, gently adopt it, or make a stance that we're not an AI agency, or make a stance that we are an AI agency.
Yeah, interesting. And if we look beyond agency life and perhaps some other themes that you've picked up on in your kind of research, it's a big topic, isn't it? But do you think, like all technology that's very far-reaching and it's such a big topic, and I think people are still sort of getting their heads around it, and every day is full of AI sort of headlines. Do you think it will settle down into something that we're all a bit more comfortable with, or do you think it's so revolutionary that actually it's going to accelerate in all sorts of different ways that we haven't probably thought about yet.
Yeah, I think it could be a bit like smartphones on steroids, if you know what
Yeah.
I mean. But I particularly mean you're going to have people who just like their smartphone is an extension of themselves, and then you've got people who've got it in a wallet and on font size 52 or whatever, and it's there, but it's not integral. So I think it's gonna split in that way, and I think it would be interesting. I've heard people say quietly to me, like, there'll be 10% the amount of creatives that there are at the minute in 5-10 years time, and they won't recruit juniors. I hope they're wrong, clearly, or it could be that model of there'll be lots of one man down. Because they become creative curators rather than creative directors, because they can take it that way. They can do all the strategy work themselves. Comes up quite a lot in the chat, is like, I'm now a planner, or they can take it that way. They can go into the execution in ways that they never could before. So I think that's the bit that I find fascinating, but I do think it will be the creatives in their sort of 20s and, well, I was going to say and 30s, but I think it's going to be people in their 20s, because it's that cliche about natives. It'll be the AI natives that'll kind of hoover up.
Do you think, this is more of a personal question, but do you think with all of this, because you're looking at it very deeply, a lot more deeply than most people do, do you, in the back of mind, do you think this might be the springboard to something beyond HeyHuman, or are you more thinking this is about how I'm going to inform my agency direction?
It's definitely more about it's a personal peccadillo that happens to also. I mean, I did an MBA kind of in that way as well. I think with MBAs it takes about 3 years to percolate it yourself and then really apply it to your business. So it is more, it's a personal thing. But I mean, my thing is, not jumping too far ahead, is if you become an expert in something else will come out of it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And I maybe, people have asked me to do like their AI training and things like that, and I'm like, too soon. But, and also I know that there's lots of people who probably don't know that much, but are hoovering up AI training at the minute, whilst there's also good people out there. Yeah. So we'll see.
Yeah, great. We'll watch this space. We're almost out of time, actually. So let's just wrap up with the question I ask everybody, which is, tell us about a leader who's had the biggest professional impact on you. And it could be anybody, famous, not famous. Could be from the world of AI, could be from the world of agency and creativity. But tell us about somebody who's kind of looms large in a big way, positive way in your career.
Yeah, so what I'm going, what would blah blah do, kind of thing. I mean, look, I would say, and I picked on, I would say it probably my early leaders in both government and agencies, and I could pick one, but their thing was they just gave me so much room to either fly or do some stupid things, and I definitely did both. And I just think that it's that, what their motivation was, I can't say, but it was that balance of, letting go, and having the confidence in you. And I guess the thing is, people always say, do you trust people to do their work when they're at home, kind of thing, this whole debate. And I go, well, it'd be a bad reflection on me and the others if we were recruiting people we didn't trust. Yeah. Why are you recruiting people you don't trust? And I guess that was the biggest thing to make it more pointed. They gave me a lot of trust. And that's not easy, and like I say, you have to go, if I've chosen people to work with me and they've worked with me for a long time, I need to trust them. But it's not, and I'm not saying it's easy. I hate these leader interviews when people make it glib and I don't care what you're doing. I don't care if you're up the Eiffel Tower doing your work. I don't care X, Y. I don't believe that's true, because that'd be a kind of weird because you're a leader. But you've also got to balance that with, you trust people and they, and they benefit from that.
Yeah, that's a great example. Actually, as you're talking, I'm thinking back to some leaders in my early career who did the same thing, and it's a bit like actually the moment in the car when you pass your
Yeah,
test and you're driving. It's like, oh shit, like I'm in charge of everything now, but it's really scary. But of course, you learn and your confidence grows, and yeah, being leaders that give the opportunity and the trust to do that
yeah.
are
I
exceptional
will
people.
say I got 3 points within a month of passing my test. So I don't know. Take out of that what you will, man.
Neil, pleasure talking with you. Some great
You
stuff
too.
there, and look
Good
forward to
questions.
staying. Thank you, staying across what you learn in AI. That's really obviously a fantastic area to get stuck into. So, thank you so much for your time.
Brilliant. Thank you, Matt. That has been
Thanks,
great.
Neil.
Thank you, mate.
Thank you.
Cheers.